So, Jenny and Neethi, before we delve deeper into these issues, we should probably start with a fundamental question. We're all familiar with sustainability in an environmental context, but how does that translate into a social context? The UN has set an example by declaring 17 goals for global sustainable development, one of them being decent work and economic growth. But what does decent work mean, and what does social sustainability mean? Please, Jenny first, and then you, Neethi.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much. You know, Andy, you make such a warm welcome to all of us. And I'm also very excited about the participation from our audience very soon. Well, it is so excited that we have only 1 hour. And so let me indeed but put a longer time frame in the beginning. Even though the headlines come time and again, and sometimes we have heard about the news on explosion, child labor, or some other issues like a runaway factory. So there were lots of disputes. But when we look into the 1960s, when IBM and other electronics companies, the tech brand, actually they had been relocating from US, Europe, and then to East Asia, like Japan, South Korea, as well as Taiwan. So let us really take the stock into the account. And it is a long historical issue when we really want to take into the matter how electronics workers could get into the global production chain, but as you put, having a decent wage and a decent living. So sustainability for our discussion is whether workers could have participation, whether there are democratic unions, but unions in China, as we are quite aware of, it is part of the party state apparatus or part of the party state. So in terms of the very specific condition in China, sustainability would mean that whether workers themselves could have other forms of collective actions or a collective vehicle, a collective platform for them to get together, share their priorities in terms of occupational health and safety, wages, and some other conditions. So that is my understanding about labor migration, but also perhaps some of them are sinking their roots in the city, and they are really hoping to change their lives while producing our everyday electronics products like an iPhone or computer and other stuff.
Thank you, Jenny. Neethi?
So I perceive sustainability as a unified framework for understanding and addressing various aspects of work and employment based on the pillars of freedom, equity, dignity, and security. And it naturally rests on, as Andy had mentioned earlier and Jenny had mentioned, it rests on ILO's decent work framework and UN Sustainable Development Goal of decent work and economic growth. And it indicates employment and worker rights, that is opportunities for everyone to get work that is productive and it delivers a fair income, social protection, that is security in workplace and social protection for families, better prospects for personal development and social integration. And of course, social dialogue, which include all types of negotiations, consultation, or even exchange of information among representatives of governments, employers, and workers on issues of common interest relating to economic and social policy. It also includes, I believe, access to minimum resources for a dignified life, including food, housing, healthcare, and education, to care, old age, ill health, injuries, accidents, death of an earning member, and so on. Now, when we apply this lens to understand Indian experience, in 2010, Government of India and Indian Employers and Workers Organization agreed decent work program with ILO. It was aligned with our then 5-year plan structure as well. By saying this, let me tell you, it's not such an easy goal in Indian context considering India has one of the highest unemployment rate with more than 6%. And India is the country with highest share of informal workers, and they constitute more than 90% of India's workforce. That is, more than 9 out of 10 workers are informal, are concentrating in informal sector. And India is a country with one of the lowest female work participation rate, which is 23% around. And India has highest gender wage gap in Asia, where female workforce earn 34% less than their male counterpart. And moreover, India is, the unemployment rate among the youth, that is those who belong to the age group 15 to 24, was nearly 29%, which makes it one of the highest youth unemployment in this world. So considering all this, when I say this is how I perceive sustainability, but these are the challenges in front of us in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neethi and Jenny, of course. That is quite a concept, and there's quite a bit of history and quite a bit of work ahead of us, but we'll be coming back to those concepts later on in the webcast. Last December, a Wistron factory in India, in Bengaluru, India, was demolished by workers in what can be described as a violent walkout. Neethi, can you explain what happened there?
So, Wistron is a multinational corporation from Taiwan, as we all know, and it is one of Apple's global contract manufacturers. And they manufacture iPhone 7 handset and second generation iPhone SE devices in India. And it has got its establishment at Narasapura. That's the name of that village, Narasapura Industrial Estate in Kolar district, around 60 kilometers from Bangalore city in India. So Wistron started a small pilot plant in Bangalore in 2017, yes, to make the iPhone. And in 2018, Wistron suddenly decided that to make a large investment in Karnataka for a full-fledged plant. By January 2019, Wistron announced it was looking into invest as much as rupees 30 billion in its Indian subsidiary Wistron Infocom Manufacturing India Private Limited. In turn, the state of Karnataka government located 43 acres of land in this village, that is Narasapura village, for Wistron to build a larger plant. And this new unit, which is locally known as the iPhone company, which was opened in July 2020. By August 2020, the plant became fully operational with around 5,000 employees to manufacture iPhone SE and iPhone 7 models. So with this background, now let me come to what happened there. So on 12 December 2020, thousands of workers at this facility went on a rampage over non-redressal of their wages and overtime issues. After several workers raised slogans protesting against non-payment of their dues and demanding better working conditions, these demonstrations quickly snowballed and turned violent, with a few workers attacking office infrastructure and damaging goods and furniture. According to the Karnataka State Labor Department, the trigger for the violence during around 6 a.m. shift change on December 12th was an argument over the attendance system not capturing exact work hours logged by the workers. This was one of the biggest expressions of industrial unrest in India in recent years. And the Prime Minister has been reported to be very worried, and the state said it was disturbed, and around 160 workers were arrested immediately. And the national government asked state government for a speedy inquiry to identify the culprits and ensure that investor sentiment is not affected due to this one-off incident. And necessary support has been offered to the firm so that the firm may restart its operation without any delay. So this was the story. This is what happened. I'll talk about the details maybe later, I guess.
Yes, thank you very much. That's quite a interesting story. It's especially interesting to note that this bears some resemblance to what happened in China between 2010 and 2016. with several strikes and walkouts and workers' actions, but also much more tragic incidents. Jenny, you've co-authored a book on the subject and conducted in-depth research over almost a decade. Can you tell us more about the book and what compelled you and your colleagues, to work on the project?
Right. Well, I also learned a lot from Neethi and Andy's your conversation. And China is indeed just one of the largest nations that are opening up to foreign capital. So if we take into the account of global capitalism in this context, maybe it won't be too surprising for us to anticipate another big round of resistance in China. It could be just a spark in India, in China, in Vietnam, or in some other countries. But the specific timing, as you just put, in 2010, it was a year when we had been listening to the TV news every day almost, because in that single year, 18 young migrant workers at one of the largest manufacturers in China. Actually, it is also a Taiwanese multinational, Foxconn. So 18 young migrant workers, they commit suicide. Well, 14 of them died, only 4 survived. So until about May in that year, the management, instead of finding out the root causes for the desperate action, they just set up the anti-suicide net everywhere. So in terms of the safety net, but does it really help saving lives? We have to understand perhaps 2 major things here. One, that might be related to management system and the broader political economy in China. These are migrants, very young, and may not have their parents and friends around. So it is both about the social and the working lives. And the second level of analysis is about the global supply chain, how the purchasing system or the ordering practices will shape the conditions on the shop floor. So to put it short, this book was really sparked by the series of suicides. And we have been asking why. Why did it happen? Can we prevent or save lives as quick as possible? And it then rolled into a decade-long research. Well, that is, again, very quite unexpected. But when we look back, these 10 years are very worthwhile direct attempts to understand not only workers' rights issue, but corporate responsibility as well as political governance. And I do believe that today, while we had many participants who are joining this webinar, some of you directly engaging into civil society or global business segments, while the others, we might be the students or as me, myself, a consumer. So I do believe that from many links, we can put together and join our efforts to try to look into what happened. And throughout 10 years, are there significant or big changes and where we are heading to? So Dying for an iPhone is actually a book that situates in this tragedy, but we also want to go beyond the tragedy to generate more discussions and to actually take into action to make some sustainable changes.
Thank you very much. So during this decades-long, very intensive period of research, what were the main causes or contributing factors that you've identified that affected workers negatively?
Right, this is a very good question. I should also emphasize that suicide is a very complicated phenomena. Suicide could reflect the intense struggle of this individual, psychological level, or some other pain that he or she feels unbearable. But we did talk to one of the survivors, and she was only 17 while we were in the hospital. but she was completely paralyzed from the waist down because she jumped from the 4th level of the dormitory. So from her story, we do know a little bit more about the very repressive labor regime at Foxconn. But we also do not want to just highlight one or two particular story. We do see something more systematic and structural, and that is actually about how global supply chain is being structured. And that means how workers are being forced to do compulsory overtime and to actually just compete against each other in terms of product quality, speed, as well as some other requirements, but that really pushed them to the extreme. So that is more about the working situation, but in a broader context, that is also the lack of freedom of association, what Neethi had brought up nicely in her introduction. So it is quite complicated. Suicide also is never only a personal witness. It does reflect something more difficult for the new generation of migrant workers in China who want to stay in the city to make their better future, but they also have no way to retreat because farm work is no longer that much related or relevant to their imagination or their experience of life. So it is really also about a globalization matter and how iPhones and iPads at that time was only produced by Foxconn. So it is all these uniqueness, but also some generalized factors like migration, urbanization, and globalization that shapes the tragedy. But also there are many who do stand up and fight back.
I see. It's quite a complex issue, as we've already seen in the beginning. Unfortunately, we don't have time to look into everything, but I'm still very curious. One would expect there to be immense backlash, be it from unions or internationally from socially aware consumers. Was there any? And did it have a positive effect?
Yes, this is again very good question. As we know, Foxconn until today, we also know that Foxconn produce more than 40% of our global electronics items. So more than 40%, but at the peak, according to some business information, is more than half. So Foxconn is the largest electronics manufacturer or the global supplier. And we also have to understand the global buyer like Apple and some other very influential buyers like Amazon, Facebook, and some others. So this book indeed look into the supply chain structure and wants to understand deeper the dilemma or the contradictions. You are right, we cannot look into all the different aspects, but I do want to highlight that Apple had strengthened their corporate audit. So they do inspect the supply chain. There are also new rules and regulations to tighten the overtime problems, to limit overtime working hours. But I do wish to see some more transparency in terms of their purchasing practice to engage with workers and civil society to address the complex issue. Even in terms of workers, they have been fighting for democratic unionization. That means they elect their own union members, so that would not be completely dominated by management or under the central governance of the state. So workers, companies, or capital and labor, they are in some antagonistic or hostile relations, but at the same time, each of the you can say stakeholders or the people who are concerned, we do have our voices to make, including the scholars and the concerned students in the issue.
All right, thank you very much, Jenny. So moving over to India, the Modi government was elected the first time round on the promise that they bring in high-tech jobs with the Make in India initiative. As we've seen in China, this can be a double-edged sword. Neethi, how has this promise panned out, and how does the initiative affect regular workers?
Yeah, quite an interesting question. In fact, I actually look at it from a Make in India perspective myself, when I heard about this whole issue. So here the center and the state government reacted with the alarchy to the Wistron incident, and given the importance of this project for India to establish its credential as an alternative manufacturing base to China through its Make in India initiative. So let's just talk a little bit about what is this Make in India. So on September 24th, 2014, the government has announced its Make in India initiative to encourage manufacturing in India and stimulate economy with dedicated investment in selected manufacturing and services. So electronic industry is then held as one of its most important pillars, within which the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, PLIS, aims to attract a large investment in mobile phone manufacturing and specified electronic components, including establishing assembly, testing, marketing, and packaging units. So after the announcement of Make in India, labor law reforms is focused as a magic bullet to achieve economic prosperity and attract foreign investment here. So unfortunately, the rationalization of these changes in labor regulation is taking place without any consultation with workers and trade unions. And the Wistron incident, naturally, it quickly grabbed national headlines, mainly because the Wistron project was treated as a point of pride and flag bearer for India's ambitions to become a global hub for electronics manufacturing. So moreover, through Wistron, India is one of the 3 countries in the world that manufacture Apple products besides Brazil and China. So the Wistron incident could make it challenging to attract investors and promote Make in India slogan. So yeah, that question makes a lot of sense. It's very important because the government actually consider it as a challenge to its Making India initiative.
That's very interesting because I would expect there to be legal, safeguards against that kind of mismanagement. And interestingly, Wistron does actually acknowledge that there were management and software issues. While my understanding is that the state government of Karnataka denies any wrongdoing, what could the local government have done differently to prevent this?
So more than to prevent this, I would just like to explain how was the local government actually respond to this whole experience, the whole incident. So as I mentioned, if you look at this Make in India, so in line with this Prime Minister's Make in India initiative, states too launch their local initiatives. And Karnataka state, which as you've mentioned, hosts Wistron, soon after the incident strongly condemned the violence, mainly because they were quite worried that its investment-friendly image has been left bruised by these workers, and it ensured its support to investors. And the response of the state government has been one of the outright condemnation of the destruction of property and little sympathy for the plight for workers. And in fact, the elected representative from the Kolar district even made a statement that we don't care who it is. We will take actions because this is about our district's future, and directives have given to the police authorities to take strong action. And according to the state labor minister, Wistron is a very important project and state government is committing to its success and business continuity. The state administration will ensure complete safety and security of the firm and its project. And the state level industrial bodies, including Indian Cellular and Electronics Association and Manufacturers Association for Information and Technology, have come out in solidarity with the company and mentioned that this incident has the potential to tarnish India's image. So, but interestingly, soon after the incident, enquiries at different levels have taken place, and the initial enquiry and its report came from All India Central Council of Trade Unions, that is AICCTU. It's a Central Trade Union Federation in India, and it is politically attached to Communist Party of Liberation. And according to this report, this incident was a result of workers being subjected to extremely exploitative sweatshop like worker condition, and there is a gross violation of labor laws. And the report even showed that the unit was running mainly with contract workers, and the permanent workers were around 1,300. However, the contract workers were around 8,500, and who were sort of sourced from six subcontractors. And Wistron scaled up its contractual employee strength from around 2,000 to the current number within a short period, that is from September 2020 to December 2020. They sought initial, they got initial permission for 5,000 workers, and then they went to 9,000 at their own level. This was then moved from 8 hours to 12-hour work shift, with 4 breaks totaling just 50 minutes, less than 1 hour. And the workforce was quite young, and it was even reported that the applicants, about 26, were even summarily rejected. And these workers were contracted from the neighboring districts, and even from other districts of Karnataka, and even from the neighboring villages. And these workers, especially those who were from nearby villages, were coming from extremely poor background, and most of them belonged to socially deprived communities. And this enquiry actually, this report actually showed that they were recruited for nearly 21,000 rupees per month, that is around $282, but ended up getting less than 13,000, that is around $175. And some of them were even getting around 8,000 rupees, that is 105 to $107. So, and moreover, the workers were complaining about their attendance being fudged regularly, with no employee grievance redressal system or worker union in place at the firm. Workers were constantly asking company officials for their dues. So this actually led to this sort of a pressure cooker-like situation in this factory. And then the labor department also came up with a that identified that there is violation of Contract Labor Act, Minimum Wage Act, Equal Wage Act, and so on. And factories department also showed that they didn't get any license while increasing the workforce from 5,000 to 10,000, contract workers from 5,000 to 10,000, or while increasing the working hours from 8 to 12 hours on continuous basis. So when all these reports and enquiries then later took place, state government, after this initial round of this investigation, even the state government, Karnataka state government, changed their stand, we could say, and they came up with the observation that serious violation of labor laws were taking place in this unit, and underpayment of wages, irregular hours, and poor working conditions were common in this unit, that is what actually ultimately led to the worker protest. So we could see that when the incident actually took place, there is a from then to later, after a month or so, when all these studies have taken, or a few weeks, I would say, after these studies have taken place and these reports actually came out, we could see that there's a change in the state government's stand towards this whole incident.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting, especially in the light of it being a pride project for the country and for the state, that it was allowed to happen like that. So now that both states, government, and the civil society has its eyes upon the situation, do you think those kinds of gaffes would happen again?
See, the chances of such thing happen can only increase, because if you look at as I'd mentioned earlier, as a part of this Make in India initiative, the very first thing, apart from providing various tariff supports and tax benefits and tax holidays and so on, one of the major I would say policy point which this government have taken was making changes in its uh, sort of complete overhaul of India's sort of labor laws by simplifying and subsuming nearly 29 labor laws into 4 labor codes. That is, it's called Industrial Relation Code Bill, Social Security Bill, Occupation Safety and Health, and Working Condition Bill, and Code of Wages. And this is basically, these codes are in this is basically sort of moving towards making the labor market more and more flexible. And it's a part of as Jenny had mentioned, what happened in Foxconn, where it's a kind of race to the bottom as far as the labor cost goes. So as far as that is your aim, that is your prime aim, is to reduce the cost and make India sort of flexible as far as labor component goes. I could see that such things can again happen. And in fact, we have quite a lot of stories and narratives and examples from our garment sector, which we'll discuss, I think, later. Yes.
Yes, we definitely will. Thank you very much. That's a sobering observation. You talked about flexible working conditions or flexibilization of labor laws. Not tangent to that, some people would argue that all of these things that we've been discussing are actually non-issues, or are just side effects of necessary economic stages of economic development, saying, for instance, a bad job is better than no job. Do you have convincing arguments against that stance? Perhaps Jenny first, then you, Neethi.
We do argue that there should be good jobs, and we should be able to use a different system that would get involved of workers to contribute and to also award their labor value, instead of necessarily in the capitalist form of production. If we draw the insights from the Chinese history, in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s, we had a different or a socialist system. And there we do have more inputs from workers and the managers or cadres. The gap, the wage gap between them are not as permanent as really such a big gap as like nowadays. So I do want to highlight the fact that it is rather the value, the idea, whether this is a people-oriented development model. Because for some critical scholars, I do appreciate a lot the discussion about not global value chain, but global poverty chain. So poverty situation, when there are so many countries or some reformers believe that once we get into the global production network, wages would increase, better lives. But it turns out to be somehow a little bit like the opposite, because they are being forced to do overtime work to just make it good enough to sometimes for themselves and not much for their parents or for their children. So to maybe just give a very brief response, it is not really a choice between have jobs or bad jobs, but it is a very thorough reorganization of production and social reproduction. As Neethi also pointed out, childcare, housing, healthcare, education, if we can make all these spheres connected, we should not be having 12 hours a day or even 30 days in the whole month to just keep up with the job, and that we might not even relate ourselves to assembly, because you cannot even see the whole product. And that is a kind of alienation and the sense of not having self-pride or the sense of worker identity in the whole process.
Neethi, what would you say?
So I would start with this, question of is it quantity or quality matters? Because in Indian context, as I had already mentioned, see, more than 9 out of our 10, 10 workers are engaged mainly in informal sector without any kind of social protection or any kind of, not even getting minimum wages or any other benefits and so on. And if you come, and also I have mentioned the plight of our women workforce participation and the youth unemployment and so on. And keeping all this in mind, India's already sort of pre-existing fragile labor market, we have to keep that in mind. And with that, when you look at this Make in India, interestingly, or I would say ironically, the studies have shown that despite the Making India push, the share of manufacturing sector in GDP, in India's gross domestic product, has stayed stagnant. Moreover, a 5-year assessment of this initiative witnessed a slow growth of investment in the country. And this is more so when we consider capital investment in the manufacturing sector. That was the whole the whole motive behind this Make in India call. And low wages across sectors, increased contractualization, and a preference for capital investment over labor has left this blue collar workers struggling. This is apart from India's millions of migrant workers, which everyone has seen during this pandemic, the mass exodus of migrant workers from major cities to their back to their villages in India. And so I would say, and again, if we come to Wistron, something just like Foxconn, as Jenny had mentioned, we can see quite a lot of parallels, right? In the sense, in Foxconn also, there are about 50% of their workforce were temporary workers. And this is actually violating the Chinese labor law stipulation of maximum 10% of contract workers. And more or less similar parallels and more or less similar narratives we could see about overtime and lower wages and so on. So in this context, I would say this incident actually gave us an opportunity to have a look into what really to be made, that is, or under what condition. Are these sweatshops employing an anguished workforce, young anguished workforce, made even more desperate by steadily crumbling labor protection, being marked as business-friendly regime, really helping to build those pillars of Making India initiatives? Or is it really stimulating local entrepreneurial skills? So such an initiative, I would say, must rather listen to our own local workforce and our own local entrepreneurs about what they can make.
I think we're starting to see a bit of a bigger picture here. So on one hand, we have the general economic model of what we think is our economic model and what the goal of the economic model would be. And on the other hand, we would also have the needs of the workers to be thinking of. Staying in the electronics industry in particular, despite increasing demand for consumer electronics, prices are only going one way, and that is down. Can we expect companies to take corporate social responsibility more seriously in this market? And in fact, we got an audience question that is somewhat similar. A viewer is asking whether electronics companies are applying their codes of conduct properly or not.
Right. I really want to jump in and respond. Well, who got the biggest share or who got the lion's share? There are really good analysis. If an iPhone is selling at $100, nearly 60% will go into Apple because of branding, marketing, design, but then outsource the production actually to China and some other parts. And Chinese workers by 2010, the only or the exclusive supplier in China, in Foxconn, they got less than 2%. They got less than 2%. So this is already a very clear illustration in terms of the uneven distribution of power in the global landscape. And these companies, they do have their supplier code of conduct, but their own purchasing practice will be self-defeating. It undermines all these ethical rules and regulations. When everyone hunger for the iPhone, we don't want to wait. So consumer demand as well as corporate demand, all these will shape the shop floor practice. But I do want to just make one key point here. In electronics industry, there are institutional buyers like universities or city governments. We can buy our computers, printers, and other electronics equipment collectively. And this really means a big tool right here. We can have our market leverage to bargain or to pressure the companies to really live up to their promises. And in this supply chain, we also want the workers to participate in terms of monitoring the situation. They do know their living conditions. They also know what would be deemed as a more reasonable level of wages and some other benefits like pensions. So I do want to really highlight the fact that there are many possibilities. Individual consumer, we can also care more about working conditions or the environmental impact in the electronics industry, while institutional buyers like universities or some other shareholders, we can all join our hands to think about the change.
What would you say, Neethi?
So I think from India's perspective, it may be a little early to just talk about the market share and what should be what is the company's share and how should we think about a much more equitable distribution and so on, because we are still we have just entered. I would say that I should put it up in another, from the other side. That is, Apple has just entered into Indian, manufacturing sector, right? So rather, I would like to just discuss what was Apple's response here. Perhaps that will be kind of reflections to what Jenny had mentioned, what happened in China. So when this issue happened here in India, Apple in fact undertook its own probe, and Apple put forward a statement saying that the preliminary finding from its probe indicate that there were violations in the code of conduct and prescribed for all its suppliers. And Apple then put Wistron on probation and placed all fresh production orders on hold for this Taiwanese supplier till they complete corrective action. And Apple's employees, along with independent auditors, were appointed to monitor the progress of this Wistron's corrective action. But in this backdrop, I would like to look at it from the, in connection with the recent geopolitical change happened in Apple's manufacturing and marketing front. That is, again, in 2017, so to reduce its over dependence. So what made Apple to respond in this way in India? That's what I'm just trying to talk here. So in 2017, to reduce its over dependence on China, Apple started shifting a small part of its production to Vietnam and India. And when US-China trade war escalated under the Trump administration, Apple began facing the possibility of tariff on its iPhone and MacBook. So while it is, there was this promising future, tempted Apple to set foot in India in 2017 through its contract manufacturer Wistron, and setting up a facility that actually led to setting up a facility here in Bangalore. And by setting up this facility, Apple was able to avoid 20% of its tariff that used to levy on imported smartphones in India, apart from many other policy and tariff support, which was introduced along with this Make in India package. So moreover, India has sort of remained alluring, particularly for its substantial market size as well. So India government has relaxed the law regarding foreign-owned retail stores and paving the way for Apple to even sell its products directly to Indian consumers rather than through this third-party agents. So why I mention this is it actually gives us sort of from this we can very well connect what was going on in China, and let's see what is ahead for us in Indian market.
Well, I want to chip in now. Yeah.
Yes, please.
You mentioned about geopolitical forces. I agree. There have been actually like global shopping. If you compare the package offered by Indian government, we can also look into Wisconsin. There have been lots of news around the setup of a huge LCD factory, but it is still like a big construction site out there. And that is also perhaps a part of the reason why Wisconsin people finally vote for Biden instead of Trump. I mean, there have been really empty promises. We cannot sometimes hold the corporations being accountable. But I want to share one thing, and that is really moving or touching to me. For these years of working together with workers, they do use poetries. Poetries or some other social media platforms like what we are doing now is a webinar, but they also have their own forums or some other digital online or offline means to express their strategies, their concerns, finding a lover, to make a family, to sunk their roots in the city. So all these are the more artistic or cultural form of communications. And I do really hope that while pressuring company or the state to do the right thing, that is more about strategies or tactics, but at the same time, what workers really want and the needs are beyond only economic livelihood. Of course, that is very important. But beyond that level, they are also hoping to have their families or for their next generation better education or vocational training. So there are many interventions that actually would be worthwhile for us to explore further. So I do hope that don't feel really frustrated or losing the hope. We do know it has been moving sites or relocating from East Asia and then to South Asia or Southeast Asia, and nowadays also in Latin America or the Middle East. Everywhere seems to be the green field for investment. But wherever you go, we also know that it is just a rescheduling or a reshuffling of the global crisis. Pandemic may be one, the more recent round of global financial crisis, or another round of crisis that will be coming up as long as the structure remains unchallenged. We could anticipate one more. But if workers, they are brave enough to share what are their plan for a better life or for a more sustainable, fair, and equal form of production, this is where the hope would be lying.
Thank you very much. I think we got an even clearer picture as to what different actors can do. And I believe the message that demand is what effectively shapes the market should be broadcast more broadly. Moving over, because we're slowly running out of time, moving over to solutions in sustainability. Neethi, I understand that you've conducted research in the garment industry in India, and as our viewers probably know, the issue of sustainability, both in its social and environmental sense, has been an issue that is in entrepreneurs and consumers' minds longer than it has been in electronics. What can we learn from those sustainability initiatives?
So prior to going to this garment sector, I just want to add that when a country is recast, as as some pointed out by a very interesting book recently titled Brand New Nation, that country is recast as a profitable business enterprise, or it is a kind of packaged as a commercial brand to attract investment. It is common that a race to the bottom is unfortunately is the generally accepted principle, especially with respect to competitiveness regarding labor. However, it is ironic when labor surplus countries compete primarily only on labor cost, because there are other major factors, right? Other factors including overall business climate and the reliability of the state and its business policies, logistics and transport, quality and skill. Most importantly, the quality and skill of its workforce matters as much as, if not more, than the level of wages and laxity. So so without doing much on these aspects and expecting that somehow diluting labor laws will magically bring in investment, we will be mistaken. In fact, with this, no, in fact, this is what actually kind of the framework I use, or my understanding when I look at government sectors for parallels. Why this government sector is important in this context? Because over 45 million people in India are directly employed by textile industry here, and also the business model for the textile industry is primarily export oriented, and India is one of the second largest textile manufacturer and exporter in this world. So from this, so we have quite a lot of to learn from these garment sectors. I'm not saying that the workers, we could hear only success stories, but we could see some models which can be applicable or which can be used in similar sectors like electronics. For instance, instead of demanding minimum wages, we could see that for a long time the demand is mainly for a living wage that is living wages recognized by UN as a human right, and it is a wage that is sufficient to afford a decent standard of living for a worker and their family. And it is a human right based alternative to minimum wage, which in many cases is not sufficient to afford an adequate standard of living. And the living wage benchmark provides a dignity not only to the workers but to their families as well. And there are different methodologies for calculating this. In fact, Asia Flow Wage, another organization, is actually, they have come up with a formula to calculate this living wage for government workers. So that is one thing, instead of focusing on living wage rather than just the minimum wages. And as I could hear from Jenny's talk also, that the focus on the brand, because a brand is responsible for its workers, and sort of find solution, just like what happened here in Bangalore. So engage in negotiation and signing some form of enforceable brand agreements, EBA, enforceable brand agreement between the brands and the worker organization, ideally supported by Global Federation and other global alliances and the government, is very important, in situations like this. In fact, quite glad to see that in the case of Wistron, now Wistron is a kind of, it has reopened its plant, and the inquiries are still on. And the one thing which state government has taken up very seriously is that for the recruitment of workers, state government is also involvement of government agencies are also made kind of very important to avoid any such lapses which occurred earlier. So this sort of involvement from government's side, that is, government too have duties to protect workers' human rights, rather than to invite these investors as a venue to create, just to focus on economic growth and venue to create employment. As I had mentioned earlier, more than quantity, quality of employment, government has a responsibility to look at the quality of employment as well. And so the government should have a kind of responsibility to push these brands for human rights and decent work, to come up with human rights and decent work framework. And another important thing which we could see in Wistron is that the role of there was no, the trade unions were not part of any of these work sites. So workers were actively discouraged from joining trade unions. So this is actually a violation of India Trade Union Act and freedom of association. And so brands should also take responsibility to ensure compliance with this freedom of association. And most importantly, it is important to establish and being part of global networks. This global worker unions and state governments and workers themselves should be able to be part of various global networks uh, and global federations and other global alliances dedicated to improving this working conditions and generally to improve workers. And there are various initiatives we could see in the garment sector, namely this clean cloth campaign, labor behind labor label, that is a UK based NGO campaign group to support garment workers worldwide. So this sort of network, so these workers won't feel that they are alone and they don't have any connection with the rest of the world. And this is a kind of how it was called in the beginning, that is one of kind of incident. To avoid all this, it's important to be part of this major narratives which are going on in other part of this world. And of course it is important to have a kind of solidarity between those who use these products, in garment sector those who wear, or in the electronic sector those who use these brands, and those who make them. There is always a disconnect between these two, though there are various initiatives in other part of the globe where there is the kind of solidarity between the consumers and these workers. But here we have to, even though some initiatives are in the garment sector, it's important to promote such initiatives in other sectors as well. And of course to encourage to work transparently, to include publishing data on measurable goals and publishing social audit and report and disclosing the names of suppliers and subcontractor. That will be helpful for both this worker associations and all these global networks to look at these and to look at their involvement in other projects in other part of the world, and then to analyze and then to question or to even critique the way it is going on. So this sort of transparency should be encouraged. So these all are some of the lessons we could learn from garment sector.
The most fascinating thing about this, I didn't know that this existed, was the enforceable brand agreement, the concept of an enforceable brand agreement. I think this should be on people's minds more, perhaps, and people should look into whether there are those EBAs or labels that, label EBA compliant brands. Unfortunately, we're really short on time. So to wrap up, I would like to ask you to summarize or give a final message to our viewers, what they should take away from this webcast. Perhaps Jenny first and then you, Neethi.
Right. This is really a fruitful discussion, and I like the fact that there are many different thoughts on how to go ahead. It is a very comprehensive thoughts. I very much appreciate that. If I do have to make one point, to mobilize the states to respond as well. Enforceable agreement, that is great after the Bangladesh the accord or the collapse, right? The Rana Plaza tragedy, there have been more reflections nowadays about what are the lessons that we can learn from that. And ultimately, it is not just about the different global brands, but about citizenship rights, how we are going to hold our state accountable for workers' rights, human rights, workers' rights, as well as other social reproduction needs. So thank you very much. I do hope that we will continue to pay attention to electronics workers, garment workers, or now what I'm looking into the food delivery workers or some other service worker, because no longer the young people want to work for the factories, and some of them are actually doing these kind of so-called independent contracting work. So I do hope to wrap up by saying that production-wise, the formal form of employment and the informal employment, the boundary is becoming blurred, and that we do have to think in a broader way how to improve the situation.
Thank you, Jenny. And what would your final message be, Neethi?
I would actually revisit what I had mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So when India is now coming up with this Make in India initiative, and then promoting, foreign direct investment and so on, one most important thing is to keep in mind the pre-existing vulnerabilities in India's labor market. And it is important to focus on the fragile nature of India's labor market, and merely increasing the share of manufacturing job is not enough unless the jobs are productive and well paying. And so again, we may have to kind of a chicken and egg problem. Is it quantity that what you want, or is the quality of jobs that what you want here? And because already you have a big volume of workers who are quite vulnerable, and who are kind of quite fragmented, and who are already undergoing quite a lot of vulnerabilities. And by adding to such work spaces such this, is it really stimulating a kind of local entrepreneurial skills, or is it actually how can you ensure that this provide high quality job for these workers? So let me repeat, such initiative must learn to listen to our own workforce, and local entrepreneurs about what they can make.